Well, for more on the story, let's talk to Jack Rice. He's a lawyer and former CIA officer who's done extensive research into Blackwater's operations in Iraq. Well, given the company's record there in Iraq, that includes alleged manslaughter and smuggling of weapons. Just how likely, Jack, is it to re-establish itself in the country and get a contract there?
Well, it's certainly trying to. I think the real reason they could is because they have very deep pockets, and they also have very, very good connections. You can call this company anything that you like, whether it's Blackwater, whether it's Z, whether it's Academi, whether it's John Smith. It doesn't make any difference. If there's a lot of money and there's connections, there are opportunities. I guess the sad part is, though, is that if you go to a restaurant and you have a bad meal, just because they change the name on the front door doesn't mean the food's going to be any good.
Here's a question for an ex-CIA officer. The company's founder once acknowledged the firm was at the CIA's disposal for some very risky missions, and that's a quote. What does that imply? Just how close were Blackwater's links with the CIA? What can you tell us about that?
Well, apparently they were actually quite close, and that's one of the biggest problems that I think that not just the Americans have right now, but the Europeans as well, is that when you have this close relationship between essentially mercenary groups, they're not U.S. government or European or Brits or German or anybody else. These are actually independent companies that you hire to do things that you don't want to do. The real question is the ability to control them. And the Americans did not do this very well. One of the biggest problems that they had was I think they didn't want to. They wanted to be able to shovel off certain things to these guys and say, go and do this. I think about this when I was doing things as a journalist in Iraq in 2005, 2006, 2007. I saw this there. I saw this in Afghanistan, too. So the same problem exists, and it continues to exist whether the Americans pull out or not.
Well, just today we saw thousands of Iraqis taking to the streets of the city of Fallujah celebrating the US forces' departure. Now, it was also, of course, where 4 Blackwater contractors were brutally killed back in 2004. And now that led to a bloody US siege of that city. Just how do you think the people of Iraq will feel about companies such as Blackwater now returning to their country? Because obviously we know there's been a lot of tension between US combat forces and the Iraqi people.
Oh, I think there's still a lot of problems. I mean, they're going to try to hide the American flag aspect to this, but they still exist. The real question now, of course, is whether the leadership, al-Maliki and others, really particularly care about what the quote-unquote people of Iraq think. I mean, that's always been one of the problems. But I do think that this company, whether it is, and multiple others who are there as well, will try to stay as low profile as they can. But remember, I mean, one of the aspects that just because the Americans are leaving doesn't mean they've left. The largest American embassy in the world is in Baghdad, the largest. It's bigger than China, it's bigger than Moscow, it's bigger than Britain. And so you have 15,000 people, including multiple contractors, including multiple special forces, who still have very deep fingers, and there are people right across the border who can cross into Iraqi space at the drop of a hat.
So, in effect, is it misleading to say in a way that US combat forces are leaving? Because you've already mentioned the links with the CIA, but will these people, in a way, do the job that the US combat forces would have done if they were to stay on?
Correct, and it's a very, very good point. The Americans are shining this up as if they are leaving, but they have a very deep imprint into Iraq, which is what they wanted, and the Americans will continue to have that imprint, but they're still in Kuwait. They still have troops along with the Brits and others in the Indian Ocean they can reach in very quickly. They still have a very large Camp Bondsteel in Kosovo that they could reach across. They're in Turkey, they're elsewhere. If they want to get into Iraq, they can be there in a matter of minutes.
Just finally, Jack, you did mention these companies want to keep a low profile. Are you implying perhaps that Blackwater has learnt by its mistakes and it's not likely to make the same sort of mistakes again? Can you be sure of that?
I wish I could say that. My problem is that there's a certain culture that Blackwater has, and you can change a couple of the guys at the top of the heap. They're hiring the same kinds of people. They're doing it in the very same way. They're doing much of the same work, and the leadership comes from the same places with the same connections. So my fear is the failures of the past, and they have been dramatic, will continue into the future.
Jack Rice, lawyer and former CIA officer, thanks for your time.
Always a pleasure.